it's interesting you talk about the kids who have maybe a parent in hospital or in jail or something like that. Again, as you said before, it's not necessarily the event that determines whether they are resilient or not, but sometimes those ones become more resilient because of what they have faced. Someone gave me the analogy once, and I saw it in true life when we had a hurricane come across the Cayman Islands, and it was trees that had suffered quite difficult years, that were lean years, that had the rings, I guess, the growth rings that were the strongest, that lasted the longest. And it was, in fact, the difficulty that made those trees more resilient. I don't know if it's right to compare people to trees at all, but that seems to have been what kept some of the trees well planted, whereas other trees fell down. It was the ones that were probably in the harsher conditions. Sometimes they ended up being stronger.
Well, I think it's a good analogy to use. I mean, one of the other things that make trees resilient is the fact that they are firmly rooted as well. So it's a good analogy, because I think, yes, the more of those sort of experiences you have, the more you have the ability. So events and dealing with them successfully builds confidence, and it does give you that flexibility. And that's why I think we've got to start quite early on. So the rings in human nature, for example, could represent the things that happened where you had sufficient support around you to teach you those skills from a young age, where people provide you with the support, and eventually every single challenge that you manage well, you're building confidence, and the confidence helps you to be more resilient, so that the next thing that you tackle, you might actually do much better, because you think, yeah, I can get through this as well, and yes, and I can go through this as well. It's the typical motivation kind of journey as well. If you, for example, want to engage people, you've got to give them little goals, not just the big dream vision, but you've got to give them little goals, and every time they manage to get or achieve one of those little goals, they get confidence, and that breeds confidence, that breeds engagement, that breeds a sense of progress, and so on and so on and so on. So I think those things are really valuable, but the key would be being firmly rooted as well. So I think if we notice that children, for example, don't have that firm root in either in a family context or the good thing, I think, is that in a Christian school you have that people look after each other, they keep an eye out for each other, and there's a sense of community that you don't necessarily get in other schools, is the sense that I get. Because often the people in a specific community also they might attend the same church as well, so there are lots of little touch points between people. Families know families because they know them from church, they know them from the same school, and so I think the touch points are also more than if you just send your kid to a school where there are people. And I think the COVID term bubble is quite a useful one. But when they go to a specific school, and they go to a specific church, and they go to a specific sport club, it's three different bubbles that have nothing to do with each other. And people only know people within that context, and it doesn't necessarily give you a full picture of the whole person. And so therefore, hiding the emotional challenge people might be going through within those separate bubbles is quite easy. But if you have a big bubble where everybody's involved, it's more difficult to hide those things away. And that's why I think that root in a Christian school, a Christian community, is a very valuable thing as well.
And interestingly, when when you observe the trees that had fallen over in this hurricane that I was a part of course, and it makes sense, but the trees that were standing alone were the first to go, and the trees that were in we didn't have forest to say in the Cayman Islands, but the trees that were together, and as you're saying, all the roots are intertwined, and also maybe the stronger trees around the outside are protecting the weaker ones on the inside. So I guess it's an analogy that could go a long way, couldn't it?
It can go a long way. I mean, it's a perfect analogy, I think.